I wanna try and take in all the highs, embrace them for more than a moment's time. I want you, please don't move when I push you away. I know I contradict myself some days, but will you ride the lows with me?
Welcome to Mental Health News Radio. I am your host, Kristin Sunanta Walker. Our goal is to help discussions about mental health be a regular part of your daily life, no different than discussions about physical health. Mental illness can be a topic of discussion under the umbrella of mental health, along with so many other topics. This show is the original program on mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com. Our network of shows are played in over 180 countries and cover more topics under that umbrella than you can possibly imagine. We were talking about mental health long before it became cool and popular to talk about, and thank goodness it has become so popular. We have incredible guests, advocates, patients, experts, people. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy our intro music, a song named Lows, written by Aubrey Toon. You can find her music at www.aubreytoone.com.
That night when I started praying, I cried, will you ride the lows with me? Will you ride the lows with me? When I'm down, my vision gets blurry.
Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in. I know we're listening to this on Converge Autism Radio and also Mental Health News Radio. I've got Dr. Reverend, I don't know what comes first or second, Stephanie, but Stephanie Holmes and her husband Dan are on today, and we've got some exciting things to talk about. I have some questions for you guys, but first, welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely.
So as you said, I've been on Converge Autism Radio for a while, but this is kind of exciting and new, something that my husband and I are going to do together.
Yeah, you are starting your own podcast, which I knew that would happen eventually, and I'm excited. There actually aren't a lot of autism focused podcasts that have a husband and wife team. So I was excited about that. But tell our listeners, what the premise is and also what the name of the podcast is.
Okay, our new podcast is going to be NeuroDiverse Christian Couples. And the idea kind of came to us after our daughter was diagnosed with Asperger's back then, now autism level 1, back in 2005, 2006. And as happens for many in my clientele, when a child or grandchild is identified on the spectrum, a parent or grandparent might be also identified on the spectrum, which means you have a neurodiverse marriage, someone on the spectrum married to someone who is not on the spectrum in this case. And that is kind of part of our story. So I'll kind of let Dan introduce himself.
Hello. So I'm Dan, as she just said. It was through that same process. Stephanie can certainly give you the details of the story on how this kind of came about one day at lunch, but it was really through a conversation she was having at a conference that kind of gave her an idea of what was going on in our family, that kind of said, well, if that's Sydney, someone else might be. And turns out
Right.
that I fit the general criteria. Fast forward a handful of years, and we finally made it official. I got the testing and the official word that I meet the criteria of autism level 1.
Can you talk about that? Because that's something that people ask me about all the time. And I say, you need to contact Stephanie. Here's her website. But how do you, I know you had a child that, that made you go to this conclusion, but where do you go for testing? What are the costs associated? What's that process like as an adult, finding out whether or not you're on the spectrum?
Sadly, there are not a lot of good opportunities out there for assessing and identifying adults on the spectrum, which is why I recently got trained and bought an assessment so I could start doing some adult assessment myself. Even for Dan, when we were seeking his assessment, we went to Baltimore, Maryland, to have his assessment done, because sometimes some of the myths or stereotypes that are out there about adults on the spectrum have reached into the clinical as well. And so even someone who is great at identifying children or teens may not be as adept as assessing and identifying someone on the adult spectrum, because people learn compensatory strategies. So like two things that usually get not identified correctly is maybe the person has maybe learned some eye contact or faking eye contact, at least through the assessment process. So like, oh, well, then that person can't be on the spectrum. Or maybe the person's special interest or passion has become their job. And there are some clinical people out there that would say, oh, well, if it's a job or if it's something they monetize, then it can't be a special interest passion. And Dr. Tim Brandon would disagree with that, right?
Right. Totally. I mean, there's so many people that, even a friend of mine that was very much on the misinformation, stereotypical, and also the, it's a bad thing. He finally said, well, I finally got tested and I'm on the spectrum, something we all knew forever. And he just for years was like, no, had all kinds of horrible information. And then it was interesting to watch him now accept this, and like a whole new world is open to him. That's been fantastic.
I think part of that, I'll let Dan speak to this because this wasn't an issue he faced necessarily, but a lot of adults, especially men on the spectrum, have a stigma associated with being on the spectrum. But I'll let Dan did not have a stigma. He just kept eating lunch as we had the discussion about him being on the spectrum. But as we've been coaching and working with various couples together, Dan, what's been your thought or what you're seeing about some people really pushing back about being on the spectrum? Why do you think they do that?
Well, it's kind of hard to know what somebody else is thinking. Some of it is they feel it is a deficiency or a defect in them, and they don't want to accept it. Others, it's an impairment and an official impairment, right? Instead of something you can learn your way through, you're now labeled as having an official permanent impairment of right. Say it's an impairment's a strong word, but if there's something that you're naturally not good at, you can argue whether it's an impairment or not. But bottom line, you're just naturally not good at whatever that is.
Right.
And it's a hard thing to accept sometimes, just as much as any physical activity. You might want to be really good at soccer or football or baseball, and some people just naturally are better at it than others. And
I would say I'm impaired in those areas.
Yeah. Yes. And I'm not going to be really good at basketball ever, since I'm, 5'3" or something like that. Right.
It's vertically challenged.
And it's just a natural part, and you don't really have that stigma there. But when it comes to a cognitive ability or a social thing, it tends to affect you, especially when the difference in situation causes it to be so pronounced. At work, depending on what you do at work, there may be no evidence of any kind of cognitive or social deficit.
Right.
Because you just don't exercise that aspect of who you are. You don't need to use that in that particular thing.
Right.
But when you're at home, that is a relational, that is an aspect of I should be able to relate. Someone else has an expectation of me that is now exposed, and you're left with that cognitive confusion of, well, it doesn't happen at work, but it does happen at home. So one of the two of these is right and one of the two of these is wrong, and I prefer to be right. So therefore, the one at home means it doesn't exist.
Oh, that's interesting. that will speak to a lot of people. When I thought about, I'm so glad, Dan, that you agreed to come on. I'm so glad you're doing this show with Stephanie. Stephanie, real quick, tell everybody what the name of the podcast is.
NeuroDiverse Christian Couples.
So one of the things that I've had happen recently, and this happens with me in the mental health field too, where I'll be with a bunch of people and I'm just talking about depression or about whatever. And I'm with people that I don't know whether they're educated about these things or not. They're not my close friends. They're not my colleagues. They're just people at a dinner. And so they come up with all these things that, we spend years fighting against because they're just not true, because they don't understand. And I'm not out of my bubble very often. So, and I feel like that with autism too. I'm no expert for sure, but I'm in the field. So I was at a dinner and I was listening to a mom that's in the health field talk about how they eat all this organic food. They do all these wonderful things, blah, blah, blah. It was a little preachy, and then was kind of putting down, well, not kind of, was definitely putting down all the other parents that she observed at a school function and how bad they let their kids eat and how, awful it was around food. And then when she mentioned autism and how that causes autism. And I sat at the dinner and I thought, wow, do I tackle this one? Do I just shut up? What? I wondered, what do you guys do when you're in that situation? You're not around your colleagues and family and friends that know, because they have the benefit of being around you, or they're also in the field. But when someone says something that is so, I don't want to say ignorant, even though it is, but is so uneducated, and they state it as if it's biblical fact. How do you guys handle those situations?
Well, I tend to be pretty opinionated, and when you're combined with someone else on the spectrum who doesn't care what people think, that's why
I wanted to ask you, how would you tackle that?
Well, first of all, I was very excited about a finding that came out through JAMA Psychiatry back in 2019, because this answers a lot of questions. It was a study across 5 countries with 2.1 million people. And so for anybody out there in academic research, if you get 1,000 people in your study, that's considered a strong study. But 2.1 million people in a 5-country cohort study is pretty big. And these scientists came up with a heritability of autism at 80%. That 80% are inherited genetic influences with no support, this is my favorite part, for contribution from maternal effects. So there are still some crazy ideas out there that started in the 1950s with Dr. Spock about the refrigerated mother. And that parenting and family of origin cause things like schizophrenia and autism and various, developmental issues. So it did say that there are some environmental factors that can be associated with the variances of the traits. But as far as the genetics, they found that 80% heredity. So how I kind of tackle, especially things with like the food, is I follow Dr. Daniel Amen. He's been on PBS and he's pretty big about the brain.
Well known. I've had him on the show. He's fantastic.
And so he says for all of us, what we eat, the whole gut brain connection is going to affect all of us. Now, I do find within some of the people in my clientele, foods that are high in inflammation can cause a little bit of that variance of traits that we're kind of talking about. And so what we eat organically or high inflammation foods, which a popular diet is the GFCF diet, which is controversial because some people think you're trying to cure autism with that.
Right.
But for some people, they might have maybe less anxiety or less irritability or less stomach problems. And so when you have
anyone would,
like any person. So when we say some things affect the autistic community that doesn't affect the neurotypical community, I guess that's where I get my back up a little bit, because some things are better for all of us, not just better for one particular community. And I think
And I
people
think,
like to be in control, right? So she
yeah,
thinks she can control her kid's diet, then she can control whether or not her kid gets autism or not.
well, this is somebody too that has a freak out if their kid happened to eat a goldfish at somebody's birthday party. So, there's whatever that is. That's a whole other mental health show. But there is an elitism amongst those in the, I call it the new age because it reminds me of new age spirituality. Not that I'm putting it down, but sort of new age wellness stuff that thinks that if you just, it would be like someone saying to me, which I have had people do this. Oh, you're in mental, oh, you do that about mental health and you have all these podcasts. Well, gosh, let me be on your show so I can talk about, I own a health food store. They have no other qualifications other than they own a health food store. I want to talk about how if you just took vitamins and exercised, you would never get depressed. And that's when I go, yeah, let's have a conversation right now.
Right.
So there's this elite circle that thinks that, and I think it's a way of sort of protecting yourself and putting yourself in kind of an elite status to where bad things don't happen to you. And they can get very preachy, I've noticed, and don't really want to listen to a doctor, as an example, who's, been studying this for, their entire career. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, and you can have that in the Christian faith community,
Yes.
or the Jewish faith community, in any community, you see you think you have the thing that's gonna be the answer, and part of that is all of our wanting control. If I pray this prayer, if I go to this church, if I attend that revival meeting, if I do X, Y, or Z, I will have ABC. And so what you're calling New Ageism or that form of spirituality is the same thing. Anytime we think we are in control and we want to be in control, we're saying I'm the master of my own destiny. And that's, for us as Christians, we don't get to be the masters of our own destiny in our life.
And isn't that the thing that I have noticed with my friends on the spectrum and parents of children on the spectrum is that, boy, do you, whatever they felt personally, whatever their ego grappled with about being in control, dealing with an autistic kid having a meltdown taught them, and doing it 1,000 times taught them that they have control over nothing.
Amen.
Well, even without an autistic kid, you still have control over nothing. Anybody that's ever had a 2-year-old realizes you can't make anyone do anything, regardless of their capability.
Exactly. Well, I just wondered how you guys, how you guys handled those situations. Cause I sort of waffle back and forth, Stephanie, you've interviewed so many people, so have I. And, you get all this knowledge from all these well-respected people. And, sometimes there's the fight in you to say something. And sometimes, especially after last year, I just go, I'm going to pick my battles.
That's probably my approach. I'm unlikely to approach a situation like that at all. So it would have to be heavily weighted on the harm versus help. If the mother's suggestion is, well, I think the best way to keep you from getting autism is to hit you with a 2x4, that's probably a good time to have a conversation. but always eating healthy, there's nothing just inherently wrong with that, right? And chances are that approach, that person is going to not be receptive to input. So what are you actually gaining other than inviting a fight, right? There's just not an upside generally, unless some kind of inherent harm is going on.
Right, exactly. Well, when you guys were talking about doing this as a show, what are the kind of things that you want to convey and, and discuss and put out there with doing this together?
I think to kind of normalize and I guess advertise and let people know that a lot of things that we thought about autism and being on the spectrum aren't true. I was reflecting back, and I think I maybe even said this on one of my podcasts, that when I was in school, and the DSM-4 had just come out, and Asperger's syndrome was introduced, my professor said I would never see someone on the spectrum in my office ever. The diagnostic rate was 1 in 10,000 at that time. And essentially the stereotype of this person's not going to get married, this person's going to be an introvert, this person doesn't have self-awareness enough to come to therapy, but you just need to know it for differential diagnosis. And so that was my introduction into the spectrum as a professional counselor. You'll never see it, just kind of tuck it away and, just know it. And now having that tiny bit of knowledge is how I helped identify my daughter. I was like, wait a minute, there was this word. Where was this word that I was never going to see? 1 in 10,000. And our diagnostic rate now is 1 in 40. I looked it up right before we got on. And so if there are 1 in 40 children being diagnosed right now on the spectrum, is it too far to extrapolate that possibly 1 in 40 adults are also on the spectrum?
I honestly, Stephanie, I mean, I we'll talk about this another time, and I'm happy to say this on my show because what haven't I said? But I wonder about myself at times, being somewhere on the spectrum. So, but going and getting tested is where I go, well, it seems like a labyrinth to get there,
And it is. You're not alone in that thought, especially as a female, because females tend to get wrongly diagnosed with depression or anxiety or bipolar or borderline. And most are not diagnosed until over the age of 30, which is sad.
Yeah, I thought about, I actually read an article recently. An adult male went through, this labyrinth to finally get tested. And he had received, all of those diagnoses. And then when he finally was correctly diagnosed, he was like, but he looks at it like, that's why I've had so many challenges with anxiety and so on because of this, this diagnosis, but also, because of being autistic, but also just that he was also able to go, no, wait a minute, there are so many things that I attribute to having this that are kind of like superpowers that are superpowers to me. And it was a really positive article. And the things that he related to being, the exceptional qualities were things that I relate to both sides of that. That's what made me think, well, maybe I should call Stephanie.
Have to come down to Atlanta.
Exactly. But I've had more and more people like we just had, as you had on Converge Autism, Sam Mitchell. I mean, talk about somebody that's embraced this as their superpower and the least introverted person you could ever meet.
Right. He definitely breaks those stereotypes.
Absolutely. And that's what's so fascinating about this. So when you, Dan, when you got diagnosed, and I mean, you guys, everybody hangs out with their peeps and the peeps know their life, but was there any moment at any time when people found out about this with the two of you and treated you differently or you felt like they did?
I don't believe that to be true.
Well, good.
Well, I don't think he's told very many people either. This radio is kind of a announcement for many people in our circle. I think about a dozen people have that acknowledgement, but there have been some who have said like, oh, I would have never have known that, or I just don't see that, or something like that.
How do you feel about that? There is like a growing thing within the autism community about, superpowers being advanced in other ways. Where do you stand, or what are your thoughts on that phenomenon that's going on?
I don't know that it's anything necessarily to be more proud of than anything else. We'll go back to the physical ability. If I was able to be the best football player ever, but I had right. I mean, that's just one aspect of who you are, and to champion your identity based on one aspect of your life is setting yourself up to crumble.
Right.
I don't think that's healthy for anybody to find the pinnacle of who they are and make their identity on that, pride themselves on it, herald it, only to have some other aspect of their life not be near that capable.
Right.
and recognize that now you have a very different view of yourself depending on your situation.
Right. We're talking about balance, right?
Right.
And I'll go back to your other question on why we wanted to do this. Some of the reason for that is I kind of view the Asperger's diagnosis as an extreme example of the regular person in that same regard, right? It gets amplified, but we're all people. We all have the same problems. It just, some of them, there's just higher mountain peaks for some of us than others. There's lower valleys for some of us than others. So you get to have an opportunity because of that extreme to point out situations that everybody faces, not just those that are diagnosed on the autism spectrum.
Right. It makes me think of how it levels the playing field for everybody. I'm not real big on, I'm special. I don't like things that, and it's a human tendency to want to be special in some way or another. And I feel like I've worked my adult life to get away from that. But, that comes from self-worth. And, if you have a lack of it, then of course you're going to be grappling for something special. And so if you're going to find that in an autism diagnosis, that's great, but have balance about it.
And I think the same could be said, and I'm not against speaking out against anybody who this is part of their identity, but I mean, for us, our identity first is in Christ. He's the one who made us and we reflect his image. And even when my daughter was diagnosed, I didn't have the autism mommy identity as part of my identity. I mean, I was Sydney's mom, but I was also Stephanie the person, Stephanie the professional, Stephanie the person, And so autism is part of our family system. It's, part of 2 of the 4 people in the family. And then my other daughter has ADHD. So she's got her own little neurodiversity going on over there. So it's just kind of, it's who we are and it's part of our system. And we're not like overly stating it, but we don't hide it either. I kind of just consider us trying to be moderate in the approach. Like Dan said, it doesn't define who we are, but it's certainly this piece of who we are as a marriage and a family is different from the majority. And so it means you need to, if you're a clinician or a minister or a chaplain, or you're working with marriage and families, you need to know you can't make all families fit in your cookie cutter shape. You're going to need to know that there are different types of family, even within the Christian faith. And we are certainly one of those quirky, different families.
Well, I think about this too, when you start putting people in boxes and you look at, the first thing that you see with someone, you just take them at that face value of, they're overweight, or, they're too thin, or, they're what color they are, or what the religion they might have told you they are. And then let's keep it on the health side. So let's say it's someone who, has had some health challenges, and someone will treat them like they're deficient in some way. And often that person also feels like they're deficient in some way because of these things. But what you don't take a look at, or what I try to do more of, is you have no idea how far that person has walked to be where they're at right now. They could have been way further down the road, and this is the Olympiad in them that brought them to this place. So who am I to judge them?
Right. And I see that sometimes in step-blended families. Let's just say mom and her child has autism, and she marries this, new person who's coming into the family, and they're thinking, oh, your child is so badly behaved, or this, that, and the other, but they didn't know where that child started from. And so there's a lot of that happens in step families. Well, if you just do this, well, if you just discipline them more, if you baby them or you coddle them, but they have no idea what that starting point was. And so that can be already a problem in the marriage, because it's relative based on what they're seeing and what they're comparing that child to isn't fair really to the child.
Exactly. And that's the piece where I'm like you, Dan, I'll typically now walk away from, an argument about something or whatever. But it's interesting for me being this person that uses their voice and has used my voice in many ways as an advocate to spend a lot more time lately being quiet and just going, okay, I'll use my voice where I feel like it's going to do some good, but I'm not going to change this person's mind about how they just described someone they just met when they know because they came with a health problem and all of a sudden it's, well, if they ate better or if they did this or if they didn't get vaccinated or if they whatever, they wouldn't have this issue right now when they have no idea what's going on in that person's life. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And as you can tell, Dan's the strong silent type.
That's okay. It takes every kind. Well, I'm so excited for you guys to do this. And one of the things I want to put out there is, this network is about using your voice. These podcasts are owned and, paid for the hard work that every podcaster goes into editing, all the things. They're owned and blood, sweat, and tears go into a lot of these things. And so one of the things you asked me, Stephanie, was, do I have to be careful about my Christianity? And my answer was, heck no. You can God it up through the whole thing. You were.
God it up. I have never heard that, Kristin. God it up. Let's change that. We can keep Christ as the focus.
Right, exactly. You see where my growing up around religion comes from. I don't have that same vernacular, but it's like, that's the point. It's like, there are people that do shows and they don't mention, anything to do with a faith, and that's their thing. And then there are people that do. So my thing is just use your voice. It's your voice. It's what you came here to say. It's what you're called to do. So do it. So I'm really excited that you're doing this. And I was really excited, Dan, that when I heard that you were doing this with Stephanie.
Well, thank you. And I don't mind God it up. I kind of liked that.
Fist pump. Yeah. God it up. Yeah. All right. Well, again, tell our listeners again what your show is going to be or what it is named.
Okay, so we're NeuroDiverse Christian Couples because even in NeuroDiverse couples, that is someone on the spectrum married to someone not on the spectrum, there are some different challenges that can come with faith and Christianity, especially, I'll say it this way, there can be some legalistic thinkings about marriage anyway. And those can be amplified sometimes in neurodiverse situations. But our goal and aim is to build communication, to build connection. We want to educate people. We want to equip people. We want to be open about our marriage and who we are and kind of share things that we've walked through, but also we might have professionals or other couples on as this community learning together, learn through some of our challenges and learn through some of our triumphs. And again, other couples that we may have on and sometimes people who've gone through divorce from these situations. We can learn from those who've walked in that journey as well. So it'll be a bunch of different things, and we'll be alternating it between one Monday might be specifically geared towards the neurodiverse couple, and then the next week might be more about the family system or advocacy or stuff you need to know for your child or autism or special needs or maybe multi disabilities or differences that might be going on. So it'll kind of change every other week from a strong focus to the couple to something else within a special needs or a family that just has some differences in their system.
I love it. Fantastic. I'm glad that you hosted Converge Autism for so long. It's been amazing. And that you took that process. I wouldn't expect anything different of you, Stephanie, obviously, that you're going to study how to do something, how to do it well. And you did that. You dove in and got your feet wet. And so now you're like completely ready to have your own show. So I'm excited to hear your first one.
Well, thank you.
Dan, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, you're welcome. I think if I could sum up
Absolutely.
what I hope for the podcast is really, it's just an opportunity to provide someone else a little bit of hope.
Yeah. Isn't that what the world needs right now? Absolutely. Well, thank you both. And listeners, thank you for tuning in. And we will have Stephanie and Dan on again. And of course, you can enjoy them with their own podcast on the network. Thanks for listening.